He was just a single dad fixing a flat tire in the middle of a storm. She was a stranger in an expensive car trying to outrun her own past. Neither of them knew that a quiet act of kindness one most people would forget would begin something neither of them could have written, even if they tried. If you're someone who believes that the smallest moments can lead to the most powerful stories, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next story that just might stay with you long after it ends. Now let's begin. Single dad fixed her flat tire. He didn't know she was a Hollywood producer looking for a real hero. The rain hadn't stopped in hours. Thick sheets of water blurred the Missouri landscape into a watercolor of gray and rust, abandoned barns, skeletal trees, and the glint of the taillights glowing dim through fog. Jake Morrison hunched forward in the driver's seat of his dented Ford pickup wipers, screeching a rhythm that matched the ache in his temple. From the passenger seat, Ella swung her legs beneath her booster seat, humming off-key. A crayon drawing of a house with smoke curling from the chimney and two stick figures, one tall, one small, rested in her lap. "Your art show go okay, pumpkin?" Jake asked, stealing a glance at her in the rearview mirror. She nodded, then leaned forward. Miss Haley said, "Mine looked like a real home. Like love lives there." Jake smiled softly. "Sounds like she's got good eyes." They turned off the state highway onto the winding back road home, where visibility dropped even more. Ella went quiet. That's when Jake saw it, hazards blinking dimly through the downpour. A black Range Rover was pulled onto the shoulder, tilted slightly to one side. "Someone's in trouble," he muttered. He slowed, bringing the truck to a stop several feet behind the vehicle. Through the rain-blurred windshield, he spotted a woman in a camel trench coat crouched beside the car, clearly struggling with the flat tire. "Stay inside," Jake told Ella, already grabbing the flashlight from the glove box. She nodded, eyes wide. "Be careful, Daddy." Jake stepped out into the storm. Rain drenched him instantly. Mud clung to his boots as he approached. The woman didn't notice him at first. She was wrestling with the lug wrench-soaked hair plastered to her cheek. "Ma'am," he called over the rain. "Need some help?" She startled and turned. Even beneath the water streaking down her face, Jake saw the war between caution and relief. I've been calling roadside assistance, but no signal out here," she said. Her voice was taut, clipped. "I was about to try walking to town." Jake shook his head. "Not in this storm, and definitely not on this road. Tire's done for." "Trunk open." She hesitated, then nodded and hit the key fob. Jake moved without another word. He found the spare, and the jack dropped to his knees and began the mechanical dance he'd done 100 times. "Don't you want an umbrella?" she asked, watching from a careful distance. "I've got about 3 of them," Jake said, grinning, "but they're all broken." That earned him a short, reluctant laugh. The first human moment. Jake glanced up. "Name's Jake." She hesitated. "Olivia. Carter." Something flickered in her expression when she said the last name, but Jake didn't press. He worked in silence, knuckles scraping metal water running down the back of his neck. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, teeth chattering. "You should wait in the car," he offered. "I can't sit in that silence anymore," she said quietly as if to herself. "It's worse than the rain." Jake understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. 15 minutes later, the tire was on. He stood wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're all set." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a wallet. "Let me at least," Jake held up a hand. "Don't worry about it." "But I didn't stop for payment. Just didn't feel right driving past someone stuck in this mess." Olivia stared at him. "People like you don't exist in L.A." Jake shrugged. "Maybe that's why you ended up out here." Her eyes lingered on him longer than comfort allowed. Then she nodded, opened her door, and slid inside. Jake turned and walked back to the truck. He was soaked to the bone, but something about her expression stuck in his mind. A strange mix of exhaustion, pride, and something else. Fear. Disappointment. He climbed into the truck. Ella handed him a towel she kept in her backpack. "Did you save her?" she asked earnestly. Jake chuckled. "Nah, I just fixed her tire." Ella peered through the rain. She looked sad. Jake looked over at the now-moving Range Rover taillights fading into the storm. "Yeah," he murmured she did. 2 miles away, Olivia gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. She didn't know why the tire had made her break down. It wasn't the worst thing that had happened this week, or this year. She had tanked a multi-million-dollar production. She had watched a room full of studio execs nod while her name was dissected like a failed experiment. She had been told gently, politely that her movie about a father's strength and sacrifice lacked authenticity. They had said it with smiles, polished teeth, Ivy League words. But she had heard what they really meant. You don't understand love like that. And they were right. She hadn't spoken to her own father since she was 16. So she had driven away. Away from the glass towers. Away from deadlines and edits. She didn't even know why she'd ended up in Missouri. But tonight, a stranger had knelt in the mud to fix her tire without asking a single question. He hadn't even asked who she was. She didn't remember the last time that had happened. As she drove through the rain, Olivia thought of the man's face. Weathered, quiet, steady hands. The kind of hands you could write a story around. She gripped the wheel tighter. Maybe, just maybe, that story wasn't dead after all. The next morning, the rain had dried up, leaving a film of mist over the sleepy town of Maple Hollow. It clung to windows like breath on glass, softening every edge, tree branches, rooftops, even time itself. Jake stood behind the front counter of his garage, wiping grease off his hands with a towel that had seen better days. The smell of motor oil, steel, and coffee filled the space. A small radio crackled from a shelf, playing a soft country tune. Ella sat cross-legged on a blanket in the corner, drawing in her sketch pad, her tongue peeking out in concentration. Jake glanced at the clock. Almost 9:00. It had been less than 12 hours since he helped the stranger on the road, but she was still in his mind. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she looked like someone holding 1,000 things together with just one hand and losing her grip. He knew that look. The bell above the door jingled. Jake turned, expecting one of the regulars, Mrs. Nolan needing air in her tires again, or Hank from the fire department checking on the truck battery. Instead, it was her, Olivia Carter. Hair pinned back in a loose braid, oversized sunglasses resting on her head, a navy peacoat thrown over a cream sweater. She looked more human in daylight, less polished, more tired. Jake blinked. "I swear the tire's fine," he said with a crooked smile, unless the rain convinced it otherwise. Olivia let out a breath of a laugh. "No, the tire's still holding strong." She hesitated, then stepped closer. I wanted to say thank you." "Properly." Jake gestured to the countertop. "Well, then let me offer you a real Maple Hollow welcome burnt coffee and a seat that squeaks." She smiled, really smiled this time, and took the chair across from him. Ella looked up curious. Olivia caught her gaze and offered a gentle wave. "Hi," she said softly. Ella studied her like a scientist. "You're the rain lady." Jake choked on his coffee. Olivia laughed. "She's not wrong." Ella tilted her head. "You looked sad yesterday. Are you still sad today?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Olivia blinked, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes," she said, "but it's better now." Ella gave a small satisfied nod as if she'd approved something unspoken and went back to her drawing. Jake looked at Olivia. "Don't mind her. She's got a direct line to whatever's going on underneath all of us." "I like that," Olivia said. "She's not afraid of quiet." "Quiet's about all we've got out here," Jake said, half grinning. "Makes you pay attention." A beat of silence. Not awkward, just full. Olivia looked around the garage, the chipped paint on the walls, the oil stains that couldn't be scrubbed out no matter how many times Jake had tried. "This place feels like something from another time," she murmured. Jake shrugged. "Maybe it is." "I'm a long way from home," Olivia said, her voice thinner now. "L.A. feels like a whole other planet compared to this." "You visiting family?" Jake asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, just needed space, clarity." He nodded, saying nothing more. Ella interrupted, holding up her latest masterpiece. "I made this for you." Olivia blinked. The drawing showed a girl with long hair standing in the rain and a man kneeling beside a tire. A little girl peeked out from a truck window smiling. It hit Olivia with an ache she couldn't explain. "I've never been drawn," before she whispered. Ella grinned. "Now you have. That means you're part of our story." Jake gave her a look, half amused, half proud. Olivia carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into her bag like it was something fragile and rare. She stood. "Thank you. For the help. For the coffee. And for the honesty." Jake nodded. "Don't be a stranger, Olivia." She paused at the door. "Would you mind if I came by again? I think I need a little more quiet in my life." Ella beamed. "You can sit on the blanket next time." Jake smiled. "We've got plenty of space." That night, Olivia sat cross-legged on the motel bed, laptop open. The blinking cursor stared at her from a blank screen. She clicked open the document labeled "The Father's Light." Rewrite. The studio had shelved it 2 weeks ago, citing a lack of emotional resonance. She reread the old draft line by line, watching it collapse under its own weight. The father in her story was perfect too perfect. Noble, brave, stoic, but hollow. An idea, not a person. She minimized the file, then opened a new one. Title: The Man Without a Script. She wrote, "He didn't know who I was. He didn't ask. He saw someone stranded and stepped into the rain. He didn't wait for a camera or an audience. He did it because someone needed help, and he was there. And in that moment, the story I was trying to write began to unfold, not on paper but in a muddy roadside in Missouri with grease-stained hands and the voice of a child asking if I was still sad." She sat back, trembling. For the first time in months, the story didn't feel like work. It felt like truth. And for the first time in years, Olivia Carter wasn't performing for the world, she was listening to it. By Thursday, Maple Hollow had shed its storm-soaked skin. The sun returned in full, painting the clapboard houses and roadside fences in honeyed light. But inside Jake's garage, things moved at the same steady pace. Tires rotated, belts replaced engines, coaxed back to life with patient hands. Jake wiped sweat from his brow as he finished installing a new battery in Mrs. Nolan's Buick. She sat in the plastic chair just outside the bay doors, watching with mild amusement as Ella sketched the outline of a cat in a superhero cape. "You know," Mrs. Nolan said, her voice dry, "as autumn leaves, that girl of yours is going to change the world." Jake glanced at Ella and smiled. "She already changed mine." Before the conversation could drift into sentimentality, the low rumble of an engine drew their attention. A sleek, unfamiliar silver sedan rolled up to the lot and parked neatly near the entrance. Jake stood wiping his hands on a rag. Then she stepped out. Olivia. This time her hair was tied in a simple ponytail and she wore a navy blazer over jeans and flats, less glamorous, more grounded. She carried a paper bag from Maple Hollow's only bakery in one hand and a notebook in the other. Jake didn't say anything. He didn't have to. "I'm not stalking you," she said, holding up the bag. "I brought muffins." Ella cheered. "Muffins?" Mrs. Nolan chuckled. "Well, I guess she's family now." Jake motioned Olivia toward the chairs while he packed up his tools. "Can't say no to carbs." She sat visibly less tense than the first time. "I didn't think I'd still be here, honestly. This town has a way of slowing things down." Jake settled into the chair beside her. "That's the curse and the blessing." He took a muffin, blueberry still warm, and broke it in half. "So," he said, glancing at her notebook, "you working on something?" She hesitated. "I'm trying. It's hard to write about something real without breaking it." Jake raised a brow. "You're afraid of ruining it." "No," she said. "I'm afraid of not doing it justice." Ella wandered over hands sticky from icing. "Is your story about monsters?" Olivia laughed. "Not this one." "Then it's about love," Ella said simply. "Stories are always about love or monsters." Jake gave a quiet chuckle. "That's surprisingly accurate." Olivia looked at Ella thoughtful. "I guess mine's about someone who didn't know he was the hero." Ella tilted her head. "Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear oil on their shirt and smell like tires." Jake raised his arms in mock offense. "Hey." They all laughed, and for a moment the day felt brighter. Later that afternoon, Olivia walked through the town square alone. She didn't have a plan, just needed air and space, the kind that didn't come with noise or pressure. She passed by the town library, the closed barbershop, a second-hand bookstore, with a 50% off if you talk nice sign in the window. She stopped at the community bulletin board cluttered with paper ads and local announcements. One in faded ink caught her eye. Single Parents Workshop. Every Saturday at 10 a.m. No judgment, no cost. Just support. A photograph was tacked beside it. Blurry. A group of tired-looking parents' children clinging to their legs. And Jake, unmistakable even in grayscale, standing behind them, arms crossed, eyes kind. She traced her finger over the tacked photo. Jake never mentioned this. He hadn't tried to impress her, hadn't sold her anything, hadn't even told her his last name. He simply existed with quiet dignity. And for the first time in her career, Olivia realized she didn't want to create a character based on someone like him. She wanted to protect the truth of who he was. That evening, back at the motel, Olivia opened her laptop. The cursor blinked again, waiting. She hesitated, then did something she hadn't done in years. She opened her email and wrote to her studio contact. Subject: The Father's Light. Direction: change. This project started as fiction, but something happened. I met someone who embodies the very heart we've been trying to fake on screen. He's not an actor. He's a father. He's flawed, real, and better than any version I've imagined. I'm not pitching a rewrite. I'm starting from scratch. If the studio wants spectacle, this isn't it. If you want truth, let me show you something better. She hit send. And then she cried. Not from fear or failure, but from release. Meanwhile, in their small rented house behind the garage, Jake was washing dishes while Ella brushed her teeth. He glanced out the window into the fading dusk. He didn't know what Olivia was writing. Didn't know she'd seen the bulletin board. Didn't know his face might someday be projected onto a movie screen, even if no one knew it was him. All he knew was that for the first time in years, someone had looked at him without pity, without expectation, and seen him. Not a charity case. Not a single dad. Not a broken man. Just Jake. And somehow that felt like enough. It began as a whisper. At first, Olivia wasn't even sure why she brought the camera with her. It had been years since she'd held one herself. These days, she directed, gave instructions from behind thick monitors shielded by production crews and lighting rigs. But something about Maple Hollow made her want to be closer, more honest. So she brought her smallest camera. No tripod, no script, no crew, just a quiet lens and a question she couldn't shake. What if I just watched not controlled? Not staged. Just saw. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that made everything feel newly washed. The sky was a pale blue, the air still clinging to the chill of spring. Jake had agreed hesitantly to let her hang around the garage if she stayed out of the way. Ella was thrilled, of course. She'd appointed herself art director, giving Olivia a sticker sheet to decorate the camera. Only the gold stars, Ella warned. Those are the good luck ones. Olivia grinned and obeyed. And Jake, on the other hand, remained suspicious. Not cold, but guarded. She couldn't blame him. By mid-morning, Jake was under a truck hood, while Ella sat cross-legged nearby, reading aloud from a picture book about space. Olivia stood back, camera in hand. She wasn't recording. Not yet. Just watching. And she saw it. The way Jake gently responded to Ella's endless questions, never impatient. The way he tested the bolts twice even though once was enough. The way he said thank you to every customer even when they couldn't afford much more than gas money. There was a rhythm to him. A stillness. Not performative, just practiced, like someone who knew the weight of doing things right even when no one was looking. She slowly raised the camera and pressed record. Later that afternoon, Jake stood at the workbench wiping grease from a carburetor. "You filming today?" he asked without looking up. "Not today," Olivia replied. "Thought you brought that fancy camera." "I did," she said. "I just didn't need to press the button to remember what mattered." Jake gave a soft grunt, a sound that wasn't quite skepticism or agreement. "You ever wonder?" Olivia continued what it's like to be seen without being watched. That made him pause. He looked at her eyes, narrowed but curious. "What's the difference?" Olivia took a moment. "Being watched is judgment. Being seen is grace." Jake leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "That sounds like something written for a movie." Maybe she admitted. Or maybe I just never saw it until I got here. Ella came bounding in from outside, cheeks pink from the wind. "I showed Mrs. Nolan the stars I put on your camera. She said that means it's a magical camera now." Jake chuckled. "Well, if it breaks, at least it'll break magically." That night, Olivia returned to her motel room, sat on the edge of the bed, and watched the footage. There wasn't a single dramatic moment. No sweeping music cues. No cinematic slow motion. But it moved her more than any reel she'd produced in years. Jake tightening a bolt unaware of the camera. Ella handing him a juice box as if it were gold. A customer slipping him a homemade pie instead of a check, and Jake accepting it like payment in full. She fast-forwarded. Ella standing beside Jake, holding a wrench upside down, determined to help. Jake leaning in, adjusting her hands, not correcting, just guiding. The kind of scene no writer could script without living it. Olivia stared at the screen. Then she clicked Save. Then clicked Duplicate. Then copied the entire folder to an encrypted hard drive. It felt sacred somehow. She titled the file Unscripted, Archive 1. Elsewhere that evening, Jake sat on the porch with Ella in his lap. Fireflies blinked lazily across the lawn. "Did you have fun today, Bug?" Ella nodded. "Miss Olivia said, I can be the co-director. Is that right? She says that means I help find the truth." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's a big job for a little girl." Ella shrugged, laying her head on his chest. "I already do that for you." Jake felt something lodge in his throat, something between a smile and a sob. He kissed the top of her head and looked up at the stars, wondering how a world so broken could still gift him something so whole. He didn't know what Olivia saw when she looked through that camera. But if she saw what he saw, what he clung to through every lonely night and hard morning, then maybe it was worth letting her keep looking. The next morning, Olivia found a note taped to the garage door. "If you're bringing the magic camera, bring an extra muffin. Ella insists. No signature." But she smiled anyway. For the first time in a long time, the story she wanted to tell wasn't about power or perfection or redemption through spectacle. It was about quiet. The kind of quiet that tells the truth not with fireworks, but with fireflies. Jake didn't usually go through Olivia's things. In fact, he'd always found the idea of snooping distasteful, like breaking into someone's silence. But that morning, after Olivia had rushed out of the garage mid-coffee with nothing more than a breathless, back in 20 she'd left her satchel on the workbench. Not in her usual careful way, but open, unzipped, vulnerable. It wasn't the bag that caught his eye. It was what slipped out of it. A glossy photograph half tucked under her notebook. He didn't mean to pick it up, he only wanted to slide it back in. But as he reached for it, his eyes registered what was on the print. His garage. His hands. His face. Captured mid-action, adjusting a belt on an old Corolla, Ella in the background handing him a rag with the seriousness of a nurse in surgery. Another photo peeked from the folder behind it. Jake loading bags of groceries into an old woman's trunk, rain streaking down his flannel. A third showed him kneeling on a curb tying Ella's sneaker while she grinned down at him. And all of them were sharp, professional, framed like stills from a film. A chill rose in his spine. Not because he was angry, because he suddenly understood. This wasn't just a woman escaping L.A. This wasn't just a story about muffins and camera stickers and kind smiles. She was documenting him. Not just filming, crafting, curating. When Olivia returned an hour later, breathless and red-cheeked from a bakery run, she paused in the doorway. Jake was sitting by the window, the photographs fanned out across the counter like playing cards in a rigged hand. Her face fell instantly. "Jake," she started. He held up a hand, calm, steady, but his voice had cooled. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Olivia stepped in, closing the door behind her. Her arms tightened around the bakery bag like a shield. "I was going to. I didn't want to ruin it." Ruin what exactly? She hesitated. The way you live, the way you see things. Jake stood slowly, keeping his tone low. "Olivia, you've been pointing a lens at my life, at my daughter, and never once asked if that was okay. I didn't record anything private," she said quickly. "I only filmed what was already happening." "But you didn't tell me," he said. "That's the part that matters." She looked stricken. "I didn't mean harm. Jake, I've been trying for months to write something real. Not packaged, not performative. And then I met you and I realized what you are, what you do every day. That's the story. You don't pretend. You just show up. That maybe," he said quietly, "but stories belong to the people who live them, not to the ones who record them." The words hung between them, heavy as thunderclouds. Ella, sensing the tension, stayed outside, drawing chalk stars on the sidewalk, her world momentarily safe from grown-up sharpness. Olivia sat on the bench just outside the garage, staring at her camera case like it had betrayed her. She didn't know what stung more, Jake's disappointment or the truth behind it. She hadn't asked. She'd assumed. She'd chased the story again before the human being inside it, just like she always had. In the silence, she reached into her bag and pulled out the hard drive, the one she'd titled Unscripted, Archive 1. It felt heavier now, as though holding it required more than hands. Jake came out an hour later, wiped his hands on a rag, and saw her still there. Without a word, she stood and held the drive out to him. "I copied everything to this," she said. "It's yours. Keep it, erase it, burn it. I won't use any of it without your permission." Jake looked at her, then the drive. "What changed?" he asked. Olivia forced a sad smile. "I did. Too late, maybe. But I'd rather lose the footage than lose your trust." He nodded, once took the drive and walked back inside. She didn't follow. That night, Jake sat at his desk while Ella slept soundly in the next room, a stuffed bear tucked under one arm. The house was quiet, save for the ticking clock on the wall. He plugged in the drive. At first he didn't watch, just clicked through folders. Titles like Wednesday Morning, Jake Laughs, and Ella Stargazing Sequence. Finally he opened one. It was footage from a few days ago. He hadn't known she was filming. There he was fixing a radiator. And, behind him, Ella, handing a toy wrench to another little boy who'd come to visit with his mom. They giggled. She told him, "You have to be patient. My dad says good things take time." Jake's throat tightened. In the next clip, Olivia's voice was behind the camera, barely above a whisper. "I've directed dozens of films, but none of them moved me like this. This isn't a movie. This is grace. Quiet, honest, beautiful grace. And I almost didn't recognize it, because I was too busy chasing noise." Jake leaned back, hands over his face, and let the silence speak. The next morning, Olivia didn't come. No camera, no muffins, just absence. Jake found himself glancing at the road every few minutes like someone waiting for mail they hadn't ordered. By noon, he couldn't sit still. He wiped down the same wrench 3 times. Finally, he turned to Ella. "You want to visit the bookstore?" Ella looked up from her drawing. "Is Miss Olivia there?" Jake paused, then smiled faintly. "Maybe." The bookstore smelled like old stories and slow Saturdays. It was tucked between a barber shop and a diner, its hand-painted sign gently peeling under the Missouri sun, pages, pages, books with a heartbeat. Inside, wooden shelves tilted ever so slightly from years of being leaned on by curious elbows. Dust danced in golden shafts of light slicing through the front windows. Jake held the door open for Ella, who bounded in with a backpack full of drawings and the confidence of someone who already knew she belonged. "Remember, he said we're browsing, not building a library." Ella nodded solemnly, then immediately disappeared into the children's corner. Jake wandered through the nonfiction aisle, his hands idling across worn spines, but his eyes kept flicking toward the front of the store. Searching. She wasn't there. No Olivia behind a stack of biographies. No quiet click of her camera lens. No navy coat slung over a chair. Just stillness. He should have felt relief. Instead, the absence felt loud. He pulled a book from the shelf without seeing the title and flipped it open, hoping distraction might quiet the ache in his chest. Instead, a slip of paper fluttered out and landed on the floor. It wasn't a receipt or a bookmark. It was a postcard, creased handwritten and unfinished. It read, "To the man who never asked for thanks. You showed me what kindness looks like when no one's watching. You reminded me what stories are made of. You didn't save me with words. You did it by being real, by making me believe in good things again. I wanted to leave this on your workbench, but I wasn't brave enough. If you're reading this, maybe I finally was." There was no signature. But Jake knew. He held the postcard like a fragile thing, like if he breathed too hard, it might vanish. Daddy Ella called from behind a tower of books. They have the one about the little astronaut who gets lost and finds her own way home. Jake tucked the postcard into his chest pocket. "Then that's the one we'll get," he said, forcing a smile. That evening, Jake sat at the kitchen table long after Ella had fallen asleep. The hard drive sat beside him untouched since he watched the first clips. And now, the postcard. He wasn't angry anymore. He'd seen Olivia's remorse, her honesty. He'd heard her voice not as a director shaping a narrative, but as a woman holding a truth she hadn't known how to carry. He remembered what she said when they first met. It's worse in the silence. He knew that feeling. Knew it from hospital waiting rooms, from nights staring at a baby monitor after his wife passed, from the stretch of years when every kindness he offered felt like pouring water into a bottomless well, unseen, unreturned. And now someone had seen him. Not for glory, not for gain, but because she needed to believe that goodness still existed, and somehow he'd reminded her. Jake opened his drawer and pulled out a sheet of thick stationery. It smelled faintly of cedar and oil, the kind you only used when you needed to say something real. He wrote slowly, pausing often. "Olivia. You asked if being seen was different than being watched. I didn't understand then. I think I do now. You saw me, even when I didn't want to be seen. You filmed what I thought was invisible, and you held it with care. You reminded me that maybe it's okay for good things to be known too. If you still want to tell that story, I trust you, but only if it stays honest. No polish, no spotlight, just life, as it is. Jake." He folded the note, slid it into an envelope, and stared at it for a long time. Then he left it on the kitchen table. Not to send, not yet. Just there, waiting. Across town, Olivia sat on the edge of her motel bed, knees pulled to her chest, her laptop open beside her blank. She'd tried to write all day, not the script, not the proposal, just anything. But the words wouldn't come. She had wanted to leave Maple Hollow with footage. Now she wanted to leave with forgiveness. But she hadn't earned it. Her phone buzzed. A message from her studio contact checking in. Any movement on the father's light pitch deck due next week. She stared at it for a full minute before clicking reply. But instead of sending an update, she wrote, "Maybe the real pitch isn't a film. Maybe it's a letter, a meal, a mechanic changing your tire in the rain without asking your name." She didn't hit send. Instead, she closed the laptop and stood by the window watching the sky melt into deep navy. A single firefly blinked near the glass. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Jake," as if he might hear her. And somehow in the quiet that followed it felt like the words weren't wasted. It was a Tuesday morning when the note disappeared. Jake had left it on the kitchen table for 3 days, unsealed, unstamped, unread by anyone but him. Each night he'd pass it. Each morning he'd pause, fingertips grazing the edge heart caught somewhere between resolve and fear. But on the 4th morning, it was gone. He didn't remember moving it. Ella couldn't reach that high. He stood staring at the blank spot like it had vanished into the air until he saw the corner of a pink envelope peeking out of her backpack. "Ella," he called gently, "can I see what's in your bag?" She hesitated, chewing her lip. Then she handed it over, guilt blooming across her face like a bruise. "I didn't open it," she whispered. "But it was on the table for so long. I thought maybe you forgot. I wanted her to know." Jake knelt beside her. "You gave this to Miss Olivia." Ella nodded slowly. "I left it at the bookstore. The lady behind the counter said she'd drop it at her motel." Jake sighed. Not with anger. Just the quiet exhale of a man whose child had read his heart and acted in love. He looked at her eyes, soft. "You really want her to come back?" Ella nodded again. "She makes you look different. Lighter. Like when you talk about Mom." Jake closed his eyes for a second. That was the first time Ella had said Mom aloud in nearly a year. He kissed her forehead. "Thanks for being braver than me." That afternoon, Olivia sat alone on a bench behind the bookstore, a mug of tea in one hand, in the other, Jake's letter. She'd read it 4 times. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't grand, but it was real, steady, just like him. The last 2 lines played on repeat in her mind. "If you still want to tell that story, I trust you, but only if it stays honest." It humbled her, because Jake wasn't giving her permission to film him. He was giving her trust, the rarest currency in a world of curated versions and perfect takes. She pressed the letter to her chest, then reached into her bag and pulled out a notepad. She didn't write a script this time. She wrote a plan. Not for a movie, not for a pitch, for a visit. The bell above the garage door rang that evening, right before closing. Jake looked up from his paperwork and froze. She was standing there, coat draped over her arm hair, wind-blown, no camera in sight. Just a folder in her hands and something raw in her expression. "I read your letter," Olivia said. "I figured. I'd like to talk." Jake nodded slowly. "Okay." Ella peeked out from the back room, saw Olivia, and let out aloud, "I knew you'd come back before vanishing again." Olivia smiled, then grew serious. "I want to tell your story, Jake, but not for a studio, not for an audience, for the people who forgot what grace looks like, who think heroes have to look a certain way." Jake folded his arms. "What does that look like to you?" "A community center screening," she said. "No red carpet, no casting, just the real footage. You, Ella, the town. We'd subtitle it, 'The Hero Without a Script.'" He raised a brow. "That title sounds familiar." She grinned. "Borrowed it from a postcard I never had the courage to send." Jake exhaled slowly. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said. "No glamour, just truth. And if you say no, I'll still be grateful for everything you've shown me." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Okay, but I get to approve the muffins you serve at the premiere." The next few weeks moved like spring through a sleepy orchard, quiet, certain blooming. Jake and Olivia didn't talk about what they were building. They lived it. She filmed, quietly, gently, never interrupting. She captured Ella feeding ducks at the pond, Jake replacing a radiator while humming to an old Eagles song, a widow hugging Jake after he fixed her porch light, the sunrise over Maple Hollow painting the garage windows in gold. There were no interviews, no retakes, only presence. One afternoon, as Jake and Olivia watched Ella organize crayons by color on the front porch, Olivia said softly, You know, you were right about stories belonging to the people who lived them." Jake turned toward her, and sometimes, those people forget their stories matter until someone else helps them see it. He looked down, hand-brushing hers where it rested on the porch step. He didn't pull away. "I think we're both starting to remember." She looked at him then fully without filters or framing, and for once no words needed saying. One evening near sunset, Jake found a package waiting on the garage counter. No note, no sender. Inside was a single Blu-ray disc labeled in Olivia's handwriting for Ella, the story she helped tell, and beneath it a sticky note that simply read, "She's the co-director after all." Jake didn't open it right away. He just stared at it, hand resting on the case like it was something sacred. Not because it was a film, but because it was theirs. A story without lights, without actors, without a script, but full of love. And that Jake thought was more than enough. Saturday mornings in Maple Hollow didn't buzz, they murmured. The sun spilled over rooftops like melted honey, and the town unfolded. Slowly, coffee brewed in antique percolators, screen doors creaked open and neighbors waved, not because they had to, but because they meant it. At precisely 9:45, Jake pulled up to the small red brick building nestled between the library and the post office. The weathered sign above the door read Single Parents Workshop. Every Saturday, 10 a.m. No cost, no judgment. Olivia stepped out of the passenger side with a quiet awe in her eyes. "You never told me you ran this." Jake shut the truck door and handed Ella her water bottle. "I didn't run it. It kind of ran itself. I just never stopped showing up." Ella bounced on her toes. "Miss Olivia, there's usually snacks inside, and sometimes we play What Would You Do?, where the grown-ups have to guess what kids really think." Olivia laughed. "Sounds terrifying." Jake smiled, his voice softer. "It's not a charity. It's not therapy. It's just a room where people like me don't feel alone." Inside, folding chairs formed a loose circle around a rug covered in building blocks and picture books. A pot of coffee sat on a long plastic table beside a box of donated muffins, slightly stale but offered with care. Jake greeted each person by name: Miriam, who worked double shifts at the diner; Carlos, whose daughter clung to his leg like a vine; Trish, who'd driven in from 2 towns over with twins in tow. No one dressed for performance. No one spoke with polish. But the room throbbed with something deeper earned resilience. Olivia sat in the back, camera off, notebook closed. She just watched. And what she saw undid her. Jake sat in the circle, not in front of it, not above it. He shared, listened, and never once interrupted. He spoke of spilled milk, of reading bedtime stories, half asleep, of making dinner from whatever was left in the pantry. He told a story about Ella asking if angels got tired and how he'd said "I hope not" before realizing he felt like one who had. And the room nodded, not with pity, but recognition. When Carlos broke down, speaking about how hard it was to be both the disciplinarian and the safe place, Jake didn't offer advice. He put a hand on Carlos's shoulder and said, "You're still showing up. That counts for something." The words echoed. "You're still showing up." In that moment, Olivia realized Jake hadn't just helped fix her tire. He'd quietly, steadily been fixing lives around him without ever claiming credit. She felt her eyes sting. After the session, Olivia helped Ella stack chairs while Jake handed out paper bags of leftover groceries. "You okay?" he asked, watching her from across the room. She nodded. "I think I'm just starting to understand how big this story really is." Jake chuckled. "This isn't a story, Olivia. It's just life." Maybe she said, "But life like this, where people show up for each other without applause, that's rare. That's why it needs to be seen." Jake paused. "Just make sure it doesn't become about me." Olivia smiled. It never was. That evening, back at the house, Jake opened the door to find Ella sitting cross-legged on the floor, organizing her markers. She looked up, eyes shining. "Daddy, can we add more people next time?" "To the workshop?" he asked. "Yeah, I want it to grow. I want kids to know their parents are trying really, really hard." Jake knelt beside her. "You think they don't know that? Some kids don't," she whispered. "But I do, because of you." His throat tightened. He scooped her into a hug, holding her close. "You're the reason I keep trying, you know." "I know," she said into his shoulder. "I see you." Those 3 words landed like gospel. "I see you." They were what every parent longed for, what every human needed, and what Jake had never dared ask for until now. Later that night, Olivia sat on the porch laptop, open headphones on. She'd compiled footage from the workshop, and for the first time she dared to edit, not as a director, but as a witness. The screen flickered with grainy clips, Jake handing a muffin to a single mom, Carlos laughing for the first time in weeks, Ella holding a hand-drawn sign that read, "You're doing great." Olivia wiped her cheek and hit save. Then without hesitation she emailed the file to her contact at the studio. Subject, new submission. The Father's Light. "This isn't a pitch. This is a truth I had the privilege to find, not create. No actors, no lights, just one man, one girl, one town that reminded me what grace really looks like. If you don't think it's commercial enough, that's okay. I'd rather lose a deal than misrepresent this. But if you're still interested in stories that matter, watch this. He never auditioned, but he's the role we've all been waiting for." She hit send, then closed the laptop. And for the first time in her entire career, Olivia Carter felt like a student, not a storyteller. And Jake Morrison. He wasn't just her subject anymore. He was her teacher. Maple Hollow didn't have a theater. There wasn't a marquee or red carpet, no velvet ropes or spotlights. The biggest screen in town was a portable white sheet hung against the wall of the community center, flanked by folding chairs and a makeshift snack table stocked with lemonade and popcorn in wax bags. And yet, that Friday night, the small town buzzed with an energy it hadn't felt in years. Flyers had gone up earlier that week, one night only a film about real heroes. No actors. Just heart. Below it, a handwritten note added in pen, "Admission 1, open mind." Jake hadn't wanted to go. Even after Olivia showed him the final cut rough around the edges but glowing with sincerity, he resisted. "People will feel awkward watching me do oil changes on a big screen," he'd said, trying to joke. But Ella had simply looked up at him and said, "Daddy, you taught people how to stay. I think they deserve to say thank you." And somehow that undid him more than any review ever could. By 6:30 p.m., the folding chairs were filled. Children squirmed in laps. Teens hovered by the back wall, and elders from the town's first generation of shopkeepers smiled from the front row. Jake stood awkwardly at the side near the exit, tugging at the sleeves of his cleanest flannel. Olivia stood beside him. "They're not here to watch you," she said softly. "They're here to recognize themselves in you." He gave her a skeptical glance. "I mean it," she added. You reminded them of something they forgot, that doing something good without needing to be seen is the bravest kind of performance. Jake shook his head, half amused. "If this film becomes a viral sensation, I'm changing my name." "I already changed mine," she quipped. Olivia Carter, former director, current documentarian of Small Miracles. He chuckled. "Big career pivot. Best one I've ever made." The lights dimmed well. Someone flipped the breaker switch and the room hushed. The film began without introduction. No logos, no names. Just light flickering onto a sheet and the soft, familiar voice of Ella. "My dad doesn't think he's special, but I think he's the kind of hero you don't notice until you really look." What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no crescendos, no montages set to soaring violins. Just Jake tightening bolts, carrying groceries, wiping peanut butter off Ella's cheek. Community members spoke in quiet fragments layered over moments of laughter, mistakes, and patience. One clip showed Jake comforting a teenage boy from the workshop who had broken down over missing his mom. Another showed him fixing a broken taillight while humming. Another, filmed through the glass of the garage, showed Jake tucking Ella's hair behind her ear as she fell asleep at the workbench. Olivia hadn't added narration. She hadn't needed to. By the end, the audience sat in silence, thick with reverence. Some wept openly. Others simply sat unmoving. Jake felt every second like it was too much, too exposed, and yet he felt proud. Not because he was the subject, because he hadn't performed. He had simply been, and that somehow had been enough. After the last frame faded to black, a small light flicked on. Olivia stepped forward, eyes shining but voice steady. "There are no credits," she said, "because everyone in this room helped make this story true." A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the space. Olivia looked at Jake. "There's no Q&A, no panel. Just one question I'll ask all of you. Who's the hero in your own story, and are you brave enough to live it when no one's watching?" Then she stepped back. The applause started slowly, one pair of hands, then another. But it didn't erupt. It built steadily like everything else in Maple Hollow. Strong, earnest, sincere. Jake turned to Ella, who was beaming up at him, and mouthed, "Thank you." She leaned into his side and whispered, "Told you it wasn't about you. It's about all of us." An hour later, as chairs were being folded and lemonade refilled, Jake stood in the lot beside Olivia. "Why didn't you submit it to a festival?" he asked. "I did," she said. 3 of them, actually. And she smiled. "It doesn't matter. This was the real premiere." Jake looked around at parents talking to strangers, at teens laughing with kids, at Carlos hugging his daughter tight under a street lamp, and nodded. "Yeah," he murmured. "You're right." They stood in silence, side by side, as if not wanting to disturb the peace that had taken root in the air. Then Olivia spoke quietly. "Jake, I don't know if I'm going back to L.A." He looked at her surprised. She shrugged. "I used to think that city made me who I was. Now I think maybe I haven't become who I am yet." Jake smiled, gentle and sure. "Well, he said you're welcome to keep figuring it out here." That night, Jake found a new note taped to the fridge. Ella's handwriting, bold and messy. "Dad, you're the main character, but you're also the director. I love your movie." He stood there in the kitchen, hand resting on the paper. Then he laughed. Not loudly, but the kind of laugh that says, "I made it. I didn't expect to, but I did. And maybe someone else would now believe they could too." 3 days after the screening, Jake found himself staring at the empty hook where his toolbox used to hang. Not because someone had stolen it, because Olivia had borrowed it without asking, without note, and left a muffin in its place. Blueberry, slightly overbaked. Her signature. He shook his head, amused, then leaned on the workbench and took a bite. Still warm. How she managed to burn the top and undercook the middle was a mystery only she could solve. Ella padded in from the back office, still in her pajamas, her curls frizzed from sleep. "Miss Olivia said she's filming at the community garden today," she said, plopping onto the floor with her sketchbook. "Did she?" Jake asked. "And how would you know that?" "She texted me," Ella replied, eyes innocent. "She says I'm on the production team now." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yep. I'm director of kindness. It's a real job." Jake grinned, heart-swelling in that way it only did when Ella reminded him just how right she always was about people, about feelings, about where hearts belonged. And somewhere between the bite of the muffin and Ella's scribbled drawing of flowers growing out of an old wrench, he realized something he'd never actually thanked Olivia. Not really. Later that morning, Jake stopped by the garden behind the church where Olivia was crouched between rows of tomatoes, camera resting on her knee, notebook in hand. She looked up as he approached, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Here for an interview," Jake smirked. "Here to reclaim my wrench. And maybe my pride." She chuckled, rising to her feet, brushing dirt from her jeans. "You're going to have to pick one." They stood in the warmth of late spring birds, calling overhead bees, drifting lazily between blossoms. Jake cleared his throat. "I never said thank you." Olivia tilted her head. "For what? For all of it," he said. "For telling the truth. For not turning it into something shiny. You saw what we really are. And you didn't flinch. She looked at him quiet for a beat. I did flinch, she admitted. At first, I didn't know how to hold something that real without trying to shape it. But you and Ella, you taught me how. Jake exhaled tension he hadn't realized he was carrying melting from his shoulders. I've been thinking about something he said. Maybe this story isn't finished. Olivia's eyes flicked to his. You want to keep filming. No, Jake said, grinning. I want to keep living it. And maybe if you're not heading back to LA anytime soon. Her smile was slow warm. I'm not. Not until I figure out what story I'm supposed to live next. Jake nodded. Then maybe we figure it out together. She extended a hand, mock formal. Jake Morrison, mechanic, father, community icon. Are you asking me to stay? I'm asking you, he said, taking her hand to stop being the narrator. And start being a character. That evening, they hosted dinner under the string lights in Jake's backyard. Nothing fancy. Just folding chairs, paper plates, grilled corn, and laughter. Carlos brought empanadas. Mrs. Nolan brought her opinionated cat, who promptly knocked over a pitcher of sweet tea. Kids chased fireflies while adults told stories they hadn't shared in years. Olivia sat beside Jake at the edge of the deck barefoot, watching it all. This is better than any premiere I've been to, she murmured. Jake handed her a lemonade. Less paparazzi. More heart. She looked at him, her voice softer now. You really never wanted to be seen, did you? He paused. I used to think being invisible was how I survived. After Lauren died, I didn't want people looking at me like I was broken. Or brave. I just wanted to be left alone. And now Jake glanced at Ella twirling barefoot with two other little girls under the warm porch light. Now, I think, maybe being seen isn't so scary, he said, if the right person is doing the looking. Later that night, when the guests had left and the last citronella candle flickered low, Olivia lingered at the back gate. She turned to Jake, her voice tentative. If this is the last scene, it's a pretty good one. Jake stepped closer. It's not the last scene. No, he said, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. It's just the end of the first act. She smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But there was something more permanent in the way they stood, shoulders almost touching gazes. Steady silence settled like roots between them. Because some stories don't need fireworks. Some just need a place to grow. Inside the house, Ella tiptoed into the kitchen and taped a new note on the fridge right beside the last one. Love isn't big words. It's little ones whispered when no one else is listening. P.S. Don't forget to say thank you. Jake read it the next morning. He smiled and whispered into the quiet, thank you, to Ella, to Olivia, to the road that broke his silence, and to the rain that had started it all. The first snow came earlier than expected. It dusted Maple Hollow in a hush, transforming the town into a watercolor of whites and grays. The trees stood like sentinels in powdered coats, and footprints in the snow outside Jake's garage told stories before a single word was spoken. Inside, the heat hissed from old copper pipes, and the scent of pine-scented cleaner mingled with fresh coffee. Jake leaned against the counter, cradling a mug as he watched Ella hang a hand-drawn Happy Holidays sign above the register. Each letter was a different color. The exclamation mark sparkled glitter, of course. She made 6 versions, Olivia whispered beside him. This was the most professional. Jake smiled, eyes soft. I like the glitter. Makes it feel real. So do I, Olivia said, her voice quiet. Everything about this place feels more real now. She was different these days, not in the way she dressed or spoke, but in the way she moved, unhurried present. She still carried her camera in her satchel, but she didn't reach for it as often. Her lens had shifted inward. Jake had noticed. They'd fallen into a rhythm, unwritten, unforced. Mornings spent side by side in the garage, afternoons walking Ella to school, evenings cooking simple dinners and talking until the stove light was the only glow in the house. They hadn't labeled anything, hadn't needed to. Some love stories didn't start with a kiss. They began with a tire, and a choice not to look away. That afternoon, Jake drove them out to the edge of town to the hill behind the old water tower. It was a quiet spot. No buildings. Just the sky, the land, and the crunch of fresh snow under boots. Ella ran ahead, giggling, her red scarf trailing behind her like a ribbon on wind. Olivia leaned on the hood of the truck, arms crossed, cheeks pink from the cold. "Why here?" she asked. Jake didn't answer right away. He opened the truck bed and pulled out a folded wooden sign. The paint was chipped, but the words had been redone in fresh black ink. The Harris Family Center. Home for Hope. Olivia stared at it. "You're serious?" she breathed. Jake nodded. "Used to be just a thought. Now it's happening. We got the permit. Donations started after the film screened online. Some came from strangers who watched it in places we'll never visit. And the name?" He hesitated. Lauren's maiden name. Thought, maybe it was time something lasting carried her kindness forward. Olivia blinked fast, trying to keep tears from spilling. "I want to help," she said. Jake looked at her, his voice warm. "You already did." 2 weeks later, the town gathered in coats and boots under strings of light as the newly named Harris Family Center opened its doors. There was no press, just people. Carlos gave a short speech, tearful and proud. Mrs. Nolan brought a tray of cookies that collapsed under their own sugar. Kids sang carols off-key. And Ella stood at the front of the room holding a plaque she made in school that read, "This is a place where people keep showing up." Jake watched it all from the back of the room. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't want the mic. But when Olivia gently tugged his hand and whispered, "Say something just from you," he didn't hesitate. He stepped to the front, cleared his throat, and said, "I'm not good with speeches. I'm just a guy who fixes things. Cars, lights, sometimes feelings when I'm lucky. But mostly, I just try not to walk away when someone needs help." He glanced at Ella. She gave him a thumbs up. "And thanks to a few good people, some here, some watching from far away, we built a place that proves kindness doesn't need cameras. It just needs consistency." Then he looked at Olivia. "And sometimes it needs a stranger who won't let you stay invisible." The crowd clapped. But Jake didn't hear much after that, because Olivia had stepped beside him, her hand sliding into his and her head resting lightly against his shoulder. And in that moment, everything he'd lost, every quiet grief, every lonely night, every unspoken ache suddenly made room for something new. Not a replacement, but a continuation. Later, after the last coat had been hung and the last chair folded, Jake locked the center doors and turned to Olivia. Snow fell in soft spirals around them. The sky was dark, the world hushed again. "Do you think," Olivia asked, "we'll ever tell this story? The way it really happened?" Jake smiled. "We already did, but we didn't finish it." Jake shook his head. "That's the point. Some stories aren't meant to be wrapped up. Some are meant to stay open like porch lights, for whoever's still out there trying to find their way home." She looked at him, and this time he kissed her. Not because the story demanded it, but because their story had finally grown enough space to hold it. Back home, Ella scribbled another note for the fridge. This one had glitter hearts and stars. Sometimes the hero isn't the one who arrives, it's the one who never left. P.S. You can be both. Jake read it the next morning and left it there untouched, right where it belonged, and outside under a sky thick with clouds, and promised the porch light stayed on, just in case, and the beginning for someone else. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and which part of this story touched you the most? If stories like this move you, inspire you, or simply make your day feel a little warmer, please consider subscribing and joining our growing community of story lovers. Thank you so much for watching, for feeling, and for believing that kindness still matters. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep the light on.